Johor Causeway is a causeway that connects Johor Bahru, the capital city of the state of Johor in Malaysia, with Woodlands in northern Singapore. Carrying road, rail and water pipes, this 1.056km causeway is the vital link of economy, family and culture between two countries. Completed in 1923, Johor Causeway was the only land connection between Johor and Singapore until 1998 when Second Bridge was opened. What makes Johor Causeway so crucial in the development, economy, social and family connections between Malaysia and Singapore? Let's take a trip and understand of the immense importance of century-old Johor Causeway. Southern Malaysian state of Johor is separated from Republic of Singapore by Strait of Johor, also known as Strait of the Brow. The strait forms a natural moat between Johor and Singapore. In Singapore, the causeway is also known as Johor-Singapore Causeway as the causeway links Singapore and Johor. In the older publications in Singapore, the name Johor Causeway is consistently used as early as 1919 in the Malaya Tribune newspaper in 1919 and also the Straits Times newspaper in 1921. Thus, I will use the name Johor Causeway for the rest of this video. But first, let's ask the first question. Why was the causeway built across Strait of the Brow in the first place? In the early 19th century, both banks of Strait of Johor were dense jungle dotted with villages, farms and orchards. The increasing trade activities in Port of Singapore in the 19th century prompted the land clearance for pepper and gambir plantations by the Chinese and Javanese labourers in southern Johor. In 1855, Johor Bahru was established with its initial name Tanjung Puteri and the current name was proclaimed in 1866. In 1889, the administrative centre of Johor moved from Teluk Belangah, Singapore to Johor Bahru, of which the city currently remains as the state capital of Johor. Meanwhile, on the other side of the strait, Woodlands was named after the heavy mangrove forest and dense jungle that used to exist on the shores of northern Singapore. There was little development in the area before the construction of the railway. Woodlands was chosen as the terminus of former Singapore Railways as the location is the nearest point between Singapore and Johor Bahru. Railway reached Kranji in 1903 and Johor Bahru in 1909 with Strait of the Brow in between. Therefore, both banks of the strait was connected by irregular boats and later train ferries. One of the best ways to understand the life before the causeway was built is by watching the introduction scene from the old Malay film Pendekar Bujang Lapuk, premiered in 1959. The introduction scene was shot at Sungai Gadut, about 4 km west of Woodlands. Before the existence of the causeway, people crossed the strait by sampan or boats that were privately owned by the tycoons.
Oi cakap, jalan terus saya nampak. Sewa payung mana?
Payung lo kata sewa.
Sudah tentulah.
The system was so unsystematic and chaotic, run by the gang-like organisation of which sometimes charged the passengers more than they should be. There was little regulations and people could not fight or resist the powerful tycoons. There were not enough boats as well. I will buy 3 more boats. If that is not enough, I can buy 30 more boats. Understand? Due to inadequacy of boats, people had no other choice if they wanted to cross the strait other than swimming. Long wait turned into an argument. Arguments turned to a brawl and later fist fighting.
Kau siapa parah? Ini pendekar pinang 2 batang. Ayo!
The inadequacy of systematic and reliable crossing across Strait of Johor is not only plagued the passenger services. The completion of railway to Kranji in 1903 and Johor Bahru in 1909 means that there are more and more goods crossing the strait to the other side. In 1911, about 11,500 trucks crossed Strait of Johor using train ferries and the number increased to 54,000 trucks in 1917. Train ferries need to operate day and night just to carry the train wagons across the strait. The increasing number of goods crossing the strait is due to mainly increasing rubber production in central Johor. You can watch this video to understand more of the rubber history in Malaya and Singapore as well. Link is here. As the boats were not enough and the rail ferries were ran around the clock to carry the increasing number of cargoes, there is a need for a permanent link between Johor and Singapore. Causeway was chosen over the steel bridge due to geography and financial reasons. Strait of Johor has wide tide difference between 14 meters and 26 meters of depth that complicate the construction of a steel bridge. At the same time, the permanent cross between Johor Bahru and Woodlands was planned in the midst of World War I when the price of raw materials such as steel skyrocketed. Steel was high in demand to make guns or weapons, tanks, warships, canned food, just to name a few. Therefore, constructing a steel bridge was astronomically high compared to building a causeway, which was more cost efficient but still expensive. In addition, quarries in Pulau Ubin and Bukit Timah has ample supply of granite needed to construct a causeway. Locally sourced granite was cheaper than imported steel, but the cost of the project is still astronomically high. Originally, the causeway was designed to carry double-track railway with no provision of building a road. Johor insists to add a road in the causeway design, as the causeway will shut down the ferry operation that carried the road traffic crossing the strait. In the final design, Johor Causeway was planned to carry single railway track and a road with a space to add another railway. The railway portion was financed by the Federated Malaysian States government as the owner of the railway. The road portion was financed 70% by Johor and 30% by the government of the Strait settlements. Construction started in 1919 and it took 4 years to complete. However, skeptics question the sluggish progress of the causeway construction. Very few people can see the granite submerged into the strait, thus the progress of the project was questioned in the early years. Where are all the stones going? Such the slow progress that the causeway project was almost abandoned. However, the project goes on as the ferry service was operated at maximum capacity. The final cost of the Johor Causeway was 17 million Strait Settlement dollars in a time when the annual government revenue of Singapore was 23 million Strait Settlement dollars. The first train crossed Strait of Johor through the causeway on October 1923. Johor Causeway was officiated on 28th of June 1924 with the presence of Sir Lawrence Gilmer, the governor of the Strait settlements, and Sultan Ibrahim ibn Sultan Abu Bakar, the Sultan of Johor. Johor Causeway becomes the land bridge between Johor and Singapore that makes land transport possible, making the trip faster and cheaper. After the completion of the causeway, cross-strait ferries and boat services died and no longer relevant. There was a continuous railway between Singapore, Kuala Lumpur and Bangkok, encouraging regional economy and trade. Federated Malaysian States Railway or FMSR owned and operated the railway on the causeway until 1948 when it was transformed into Malayan Railway, which is today Kereta Api Tanah Melayu or KTM. It was expected that the trains took away passengers from bus and rickshaws even before the existence of the causeway. In a Straits Times article back in 1903, it was prophesied that the train will end the bus service between Singapore and JB. In the same article, quote, even the pig-headed Chinese coolies could not deny the superiority of the railway. It's not me saying. The cost of constructing Johor Causeway will be recouped by the tonnage fee charged to cargo moved by rail and tolls levied to passengers crossing the strait by rail. Passenger tolls were included in the train ticket price. Meanwhile, road was free to use until 1984 when the government of Malaysia charged the toll to incoming traffic from Woodlands to Johor Bahru. Later, Singapore imposed the toll in reciprocity in addition to enforce vehicle entry permit or VEP. At least bicycle and walking is still free. Water pipes was first installed in 1927, 3 years after the completion of the causeway. The first water pipeline was constructed on the space where the second railway track should be. 2 more water pipes were installed later at the eastern side of the causeway. The water pipes is a contentious issue as Singapore bought raw water from Johor so cheaply until 2061, 3 Malaysian cents per 1,000 gallon or 4,500 litres. Water from Johor to Singapore is a heated issue between Malaysia and Singapore as the water price is too low thanks to inflation. Revision of water price is difficult due to complexity of legal authorities. The last water agreement was signed on 1962 when international border was absent between Johor and Singapore. According to Federal Constitution of Malaysia, foreign relations is under federal government and water supply is under state government. All discussion involving water exported from Johor via causeway to Singapore must involve both Malaysia and Singapore and Johor as well. As the water issue is beyond my expertise and interest, I will not elaborate the topic any further. If the water supply could be turned off so easily, it already been done on the 10th of August 1965. One of the features of the original causeway that is no longer exists today is a waterlock at the northern end of the causeway on Johor side. The main reason why there was a waterlock is to permit small ships to sail through the causeway. Between 1938 until 1958, Sembawang Naval Base at the east of the causeway was the base for the British Royal Navy defending the Far East. Today, the former base is a commercial shipyard owned by Citrium. With the waterlock, it is quicker for small British Royal Navy ships to sail through the causeway rather than circling Singapore to sail westward. During World War II, British blew the drawbridge and waterlock to halt the advance of Imperial Japanese Army. The Japanese simply filled up the blown up section and built a temporary bridge. Since then, the waterlock were never repaired and filled with granite to shape the causeway that everyone could see today. During its planning stage in the early 20th century, Johor Causeway was never intended to be an international border crossing, as both Singapore and Johor were part of the British Empire. Before the World War II, before 1941, there was no checks at all, no immigration, no custom check. Everyone could cross just as like crossing between the states in Malaya. Even without the immigration checks, the first reported traffic congestion on the causeway was reported in 1927 due to water pipe construction. Unlike of what people think of, traffic jam is common in the early years of Johor Causeway as there were more vehicles on the road on each side. Johor joined the other 10 states in Malaya to form short-lived Malayan Union in 1946, which was disbanded in the same year and reorganized as Federation of Malaya in 1948. At the same time, Singapore did not become part of neither Malayan Union nor the later Federation of Malaya and become a separate British Crown colony instead. Due to Singapore's status as a free port and heightened security due to communist insurgencies, police checkpoint and custom check were set up by 1948. There was no need for a passport, just showing identity card or show your IC was sufficient. The most significant change happened after the separation of Singapore from Malaysia in 1965. Passport is required to cross the border since 1967. Malaysia introduced arrival card in 1971 while Singapore introduced its own arrival card in 1978. This one. Even with more stringent rules, the number of travellers kept increasing each year. Johor Causeway was widened 2 times, all to widen the road as the number of vehicles crossing the border kept increased. The most significant widening happened between 1974 until 1976 when the road on the causeway was widened from 3 lanes to current 6 lanes. According to Malaysian Parliamentary Handset dated 27th of April 1973, Malaysia spent 5 million ringgit to widen the causeway and built a large custom immigration or quarantine or CIQ complex at the northern end of the causeway with a cost of 9 million ringgit. However, the recent widening of the causeway might also cause damages to the environment. When British constructed the causeway back between 1919 and 1923, there were 10 water culverts and waterlocks to allow the seawater to flow on both sides. In the old photos, there were men fishing on the causeway, which pointed out that the seawater quality at that time was good enough for the fish to thrive. When the causeway was widened back in 1974, the water culverts were filled up and totally blocked the flow of seawater between the causeway. Road on the causeway was free until 1984 when the toll collection started on Malaysian side. Singapore charged toll as well soon after. What makes Johor Causeway the busiest border crossing in the world? One of the main reasons of the daily congestion in the causeway is the rush of Malaysians cross the strait to work in Singapore in the morning and return back in the evening. The trend of Johorians working in Singapore is not new. Historically, Singapore has better job opportunities than Johor Bahru due to numerous businesses, industries, and before the withdrawal of British Royal Navy in 1968, jobs at Sembawang Naval Shipyard. After Malaysia unilaterally left currency interchangeability agreement with Singapore and Brunei Darussalam in 1973, the value of Singaporean dollar appreciated against Malaysian ringgit. Currency interchangeability agreement is an agreement where the value of the currencies are at par with each other. Malaysia has left the agreement in 1973, which leaves Singapore and Brunei currencies par with each other. One Singaporean dollar equal to one Bruneian dollar. After 1985, the currency difference started to be felt. Same salary digits, different currency. As a result, today hundreds of thousands of Malaysians use the causeway to work in Singapore to gain better wages. A Malaysian parliamentary handset dated 23rd of September 2003, about 30,000 Malaysians entered Singapore on a daily basis. Fast forward 12 years later to 2024, the number increased to 300,000. In addition to hundreds of thousands of people trying to cross the border every day, the severe congestion happened due to tight immigration and custom checks. In the past, passport checks were conducted manually and every single arrivals need to show their passport and visa or arrival card for short-term visitors. Please fill up this form, then you can cross. Imagine the pain of queuing up to take the arrival card, of which often ran out so quickly, and find someone who has a pen if you forget to bring one. That is even before joining the queue to the immigration counter. If you drive a car or motorcycle and did not fill up the arrival card beforehand, you need to spend a few minutes in front of the booth, irritating both immigration officer and people who queuing up behind. I'm not even start on vehicle entry permit or VEP imposed on Singaporean vehicles entering Malaysia between 1967 until 1985 and reimposed from 2024, and also VEP on Malaysian vehicles entering Singapore from 1973 and all other requirements that need to be fulfilled. You forget to bring the vehicle insurance, go back. You forget to bring the grant, the vehicle grant, go back. Where is your auto pass? You don't bring? And that is just immigration. Customs check is another story. Each vehicle need to be inspected for forbidden items, contraband and unlicensed import. Goods are thoroughly checked as smuggling is still an issue. Combine all of this factor with the sheer numbers of vehicles and people, the gridlock is unavoidable. During the major holidays, the traffic worsened as more people trying to cross, to return to hometown in Malaysia, to shop in JB or to spend a holiday. The highest daily number of travellers crossing the border was recorded on the 13th of December 2024 with 553,000 crossings, double the normal average amount. With the amount of numbers of people trying to cross paired with the slow-paced movement, some people could not be patient any longer. Arguments turned to brawl and brawl turned to fist fighting. A kind of tradition similar to when people queuing up cross the strait by boats in the early 20th century. Okay, let me play the fighting music to feel more. Other than the passengers, the causeway also carries billions of ringgit and Singaporean dollars of trading goods. According to Economic Complexity Index in the year 2023, Malaysia exported 47.3 billion US dollars of goods into Singapore, while Singapore exported 31.4 billion US dollars of goods into Malaysia. As Johor Causeway is the main link between Malaysia and Singapore, a good share of these goods between these two countries pass through the causeway. In addition, Singapore heavily imports food from Malaysia, as the available land in Singapore is not enough to feed more than 6 million people. 6 million of citizens and non-citizens who live in the city-state as on June 2024, according to Singapore Department of Statistics. Such a variety of food imported from Malaysia that in the parliamentary handset dated 12th of May 1992, there was a concern of lorries carrying hogs stuck in the heavy traffic at the causeway. Thus, the causeway carries the essentials that keep both countries prosper. As useful as it seems, Johor Causeway often becomes the highlight and headache of Malaysia-Singapore diplomatic relations. The design of the causeway caused the seawater to be stagnant and not flowing to the other side, causing accumulation of pollution and ships unable to sail through the Strait of the Brow. Thus, the replacement of the causeway was suggested a few times, and the most serious attempt was made in the year 2001. In 2001, the federal government of Malaysia has decided to build a new road bridge on the Malaysian side and left the causeway in Singapore side intact. The railway and water pipelines would remain on the causeway, and a drawbridge was planned to allow the ships passing through. The project was known as the Crook Bridge, or officially known as Beautiful Bridge or Jambatan Indah. By zooming above the causeway, the remnant of reclaimed land in the middle of the causeway can be seen. The reclaimed land was meant to be the ramp for the Crook Bridge. Due to enormous cost of 1.1 billion ringgit for a 1-kilometer bridge, the bridge project was scrapped on April 2006, but the new CIQ complex construction proceeded and completed in the year 2008 with its official name, Sultan Iskandar Building. Until 1998, Johor Causeway was the only land connection between Malaysia and Singapore. There was a suggestion to build a second causeway as early as 1980, but a concrete bridge was built instead of granite rubble as the modern technology permits, something that was impossible back in 1919. With a cost of 1.3 billion ringgit, the opening of Malaysia-Singapore second link in 1998 provides a relief and alternative to the congested causeway. However, the location of the second link is far to the west between Gelang Patah and Tuas, away from the city centre. As a result, the causeway is still heavily used as the causeway is nearer to Johor Bahru and Central Business District or CBD of Singapore than the second link. Furthermore, there are more bus lines passing through the causeway than the second link. The toll at the causeway on both sides is cheaper than the second link too. Since 2008, only cashless payment in the form of Touch and Go card is accepted in Malaysian side. Singapore enforced cashless payment using EasyLink or Nets card for local vehicles and AutoPass for Malaysian vehicles. The electronification is not just limited to toll payment. Today there is no more physical card, arrival cards such as this one on both Malaysia and Singapore, but short-term visitors need to fill up the arrival card online. Visitors to Malaysia need to fill up Malaysia Digital Arrival Card or MDAC, of which Singaporeans are exempted for filling up MDAC. Visitors to Singapore need to fill up the arrival card in MyICA mobile app. MyICA mobile app allows Singaporeans and foreigners who visited Singapore before to use the QR code to clear the immigration instead of using manual counters. On Malaysian side, My Border Pass app allows Malaysians to clear the immigration using QR code. This app for now is only for Malaysians. Foreigners might be able to use this app in the near future, perhaps. Despite the diplomatic scuffles between Malaysia and Singapore due to unresolved issues such as water, Johor Causeway becomes a symbol of close relations between these neighbouring countries. Authorities on both sides of the causeway conducted gift exchanges on major holidays such as New Year and Independence Day. The close relations also involve the people who live at both sides of the causeway. Family ties, friendship, trade and business partnership, all maintained by this 1 km causeway. Do you have any special moments related to Johor Causeway? You can comment down below. If you want to use Causeway to go to Singapore or Malaysia, there are several methods you can choose. The only cross-border rail line still in operation is Shuttle Terbau operated by KTM. The shuttle runs between JB Central in Johor Bahru and Woodlands checkpoint with a total distance of 1.3 kilometers. The tickets sold out so fast, especially on weekends, so buy the tickets quickly if possible. Railway is also the original reason why the causeway was built in the first place. There are several cross-border bus lines between Singapore and southern Johor using the causeway daily. The fare depends on the bus route taken. Private vehicles such as cars, motorcycles and even bicycles use Johor Causeway daily. There are requirements to fulfill before a car or motorcycle could cross. Please check One Motoring Singapore or JPJ Malaysia for more information. In theory, walking at the causeway is possible and it is a common occurrence when the traffic is at standstill and bus is not moving. But do bear in mind that it is no pedestrian path on Malaysian side and the road side is not suitable for wheelchair users. The causeway can be clearly seen from R&F Princess Cove on Malaysian side and Woodlands waterfront on Singaporean side. Reference list in the form of articles is in the description for further reference. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something new about Johor Causeway and its vital role as the major connector between Malaysia and Singapore. Thank you so much for watching again and see you in the next video.